So Matvei Michkov comes stateside. Everybody's feeling great. Then the word comes out on Thursday. Travis Sanheim actually is the one who broke the news in actually a really funny way. Travis Sanheim goes on Twitter and says that he's hearing that Travis Konecny isn't going anywhere as he's close to signing an extension with the Flyers. And you go, like, just to hear that, to read it on the surface, you're like, oh, well, I mean, he probably would know. They're friends. But his tweet is perfection. Sources say Flyers forward Travis Konecny isn't going anywhere as the 27-year-old is closing in on an extension to stay in Philly. My source, and it points down to this picture of Konecny making a priceless face. So Sanheim breaks that story. The Flyers quote tweet it. Fine. So then we all start scrambling because then it's a matter of, all right, well, what's the contract going to look like? For those of you who might have been new or might not have been aware of what's been going on, the initial ask from the Travis Konecny camp was over $10 million, reportedly. And the Flyers wanted to keep it closer to $8 million. So then you do your negotiating and you say, all right, well, if one starts at 10 and one starts at 8, you try to meet in the middle around 9. My contention this whole time has been he's probably around an $8 million player. Some will argue 7.5. I'd say that he's around an $8 million player. The one thing that the Flyers had working against them in this negotiation is the fact that the salary cap is about to go up. And the assumption is that because of the new TV rights deals, the cap will go up every year for at least the next few years. And that the percentage of the cap that Travis Konecny's AAV is going to count against is going to be lower every year. As the cap grows, if that number stays flat, if his contract stays flat, it's a lower percentage of the total cap. Which is fine, but I always come back to just because you have more money to spend doesn't mean that you need to, or just because another team might be willing to overpay doesn't mean you have to. And I have, for better or worse, I've said, I think Travis Konecny is a really good player, and I think that he's been a very good player on a very bad team, and that he has not been a locker room problem. There haven't been rumors about him becoming a malcontent. He's done what has been asked of him as a player, and as a leader on this team, they put an A on his sweater. But my issue has been that if you really are doing the rebuild, and the rebuild is we are going to try to somewhat bottom out here to get at least one more top 5, top 3 pick to go along with Matvei Michkov, because that's where all of the elite talent typically lives. Konecny prevents you from getting that bad. Sean Couturier, if he's healthy, prevents you from getting that bad. John Tortorella, because of his ability to raise the floor of a bad team, prevents you from getting that bad. But if you start to remove some of the elements, then you are able to put yourself in a position where you're not actively trying to lose. You're not telling the players to lose. You're not telling Tortorella that you have to go out and lose because that will never work. But if you take some of the tools out of the toolbox, it's harder to do the job. So if you were trying to bottom this thing out and get another legit, maybe generational prospect to go with Matvei Michkov, trading Travis Konecny made all the sense in the world. It was going to potentially get you additional draft picks. It could have gotten you another change of scenery guy, like the Giroux trade netted Owen Tippett. But instead, it became very clear that the Flyers wanted to bring back Konecny, who, again, good player, very good player on a bad team. Would he be a very, very good player or a next-level player on a very good team? I don't know. If you plopped him onto Boston, would he all of a sudden become a 40-goal scorer? I'm not so sure. Would he become a 90-point guy? I'm not so sure. There's only one way to know, and we can't know because he has locked up. He's been locked up here. He has chosen to remain in Philadelphia to try to compete for a Stanley Cup. And it's interesting because when Michkov, when it was confirmed that he was going to be coming over early, all of a sudden, I think that took a little bit of the negotiating leverage away from Konecny's camp. Because the thought is, the number 7 overall pick, who could have been the number 2 pick in another draft, is going to be here. They play the same position. He's going to probably get some top-line minutes. Clearly, the plan is going to be that eventually he's going to be your top-line right wing. And unfortunately, for Travis Konecny, the rumors of Michkov coming over also happened to come in the year that they were looking to do this extension, and they had been working on it since the trade deadline this year. Another thing that might have worked against Konecny was the Sam Reinhart deal. where you had a guy who scored 67 goals across the regular season and the postseason, who took, I think it was 8.5. Now he's playing in Florida and there's tons of tax perks. So it looks like a very below market deal, but when you factor in the taxes, it's not a bad deal. I still think that the Players Association is probably pissed at Sam Reinhart that he didn't at least go for 9.5. You have to raise that ceiling, but as the cap goes up, bad players are going to get a lot of money and good players are going to get quite a bit of money and great players are going to get absurd amounts of money. Now, Travis Konecny was probably that $8-ish million guy. I was afraid of the term because I just go by stature, right? Sean Couturier, big dude. All right. Most people to me look big because I'm short, right? Couturier, big dude. Had it not been for multiple back injuries, would have probably been a Selke finalist again last year. Rasmus Ristolainen, legitimate giant. Travis Sanheim, who added bulk, legitimately big human being. Travis Konecny's not that. Travis Konecny's my size. He might be an inch taller than me. We might weigh the same. My, dad bod, man boobs are probably more muscle with Travis Konecny. He's in significantly better shape than I am. But I know how I feel at 33. Konechny's 27. Do I think that in year 6 of the contract, when he's waking up every day, he has 2 little kids, do I think he's going to feel as good as he does at 27? Probably not. Do I think that with the style of play that he goes into every game with, reckless abandon, he's going to be able to hold up for an 8-year contract? I don't. So I was afraid of the term, and the money is the thing that I kept losing my mind on. I was like, there's no way you can't go into a season and into a negotiation and say $10 million a year for Travis Konecny. I said, there's no way that the organization could sell that, especially after the Reinhart deal. There's no chance. So the contract came out on Thursday, 8 years, $70 million, and 8.75 AAV. And I was doing Crossing Broadcast at the time. And so my initial reaction was, all right, the money is okay. It's not horrific. I didn't want to see them get to the 9 million number. I didn't want to see them go above the $9 million mark. But 8.75 I could rationalize. And the reason I could rationalize it is if he is a 30-goal scorer, then there are teams that would trade for an $8.75 million cap hit 2 years from now to get a 30-goal scorer. Because in theory, as the cap goes up, that kind of player might end up costing close to $9.5 or $10 million. It's entirely possible. You have to remember, the market is going to reset as the cap goes up. So I thought to myself, all right, $8.75 million, I might not love the deal, but if Michkov doesn't turn into what you think he's going to, or if your rebuild catches a snag, hits a snag for some reason, and you decide 2 years from now we have to hit this, we have to hit a hard reset, like the team isn't developing like it's supposed to, we're going to continue to build around Michkov, but like we need to jettison the final guys from the last, core, which would be Konecny, it would be Sanheim, it would be Lawton. If 2 years from now they decide it's time to blow it up, they would have a player on a pretty, I think, attractive contract at that point. So it wasn't even that bad. Wasn't even that upset. However, there's a part of the contract that is significantly bad. There's a part of the contract that I just don't understand. The Flyers will tell you that it's a new era of orange, and the Flyers will tell you that they are trying to do a rebuild, not a retool, but their actions don't exactly line up all the time. Sure, they haven't added significant talent this offseason in free agency, but what did they do? They drafted in hockey purgatory because they got enamored with the idea of making the playoffs at the end of last year, even though we all knew that wasn't a good thing. So they picked in hockey purgatory. They rushed to re-sign Garnet Hathaway, who's a good bottom 6 forward, and Eric Johnson, who I guess they think is going to bring veteran leadership to be the 7th defenseman. They rushed to re-sign those guys. And they did add talent. They brought Matvei Michkov over, which is great. But then they handed out a contract that Chuck Fletcher would have handed out. They handed out this 8.75 million deal with a 6-year no movement clause. I mean, it's almost this feels like when Chuck Fletcher gave a big money deal with a no movement clause to Travis Sanheim. We all sat back and went, what the hell are you doing? 6 years, full no movement clause, and then a 2-year limited no trade clause for the final 2 years of this 8-year deal. That's horrific business. It's not even conceivable that if Travis Konecny had gotten a market, that he would have gotten a 6-year no movement clause. Now, you can make the argument, if you want to, I think you're wrong, you can make the argument, well, we, quote unquote, we, the Flyers fandom, should be grateful and feel lucky to have a player like Travis Konecny who's committed to playing here. Yes, sure, fine. No qualms. He could have waited until next year and tested free agency, and maybe he would have left. It's entirely possible. But a 6-year no movement clause is absolutely insane. Like, you have absolutely tied yourself in knots. Like, one, on the term and on the money, it's still significant money. It's still a significant enough percent of your cap right now as you're a rebuilding team. And it is a number that you have locked into place for the next 8 years. Not this year, right? It goes into effect for the 25-26 season. But for 8 years, you have him eating up almost $9 million of cap for a guy who is not a 75, 80-point producer, for a guy who has not scored 40 goals in a season. That's a lot of money to tie up while you're saying we're trying to rebuild. You already have a guy like Travis Sanheim here, locked in long-term on a contract that has a lot of money and has a no-movement clause. You are limiting your flexibility as a front office. Now, if the argument is, we would have had to give Travis Konecny $9.5 million, $9.75 million to not have the no movement clause, or to reduce that no movement clause to 3 years. Would you have rathered that, Russ? No, I wouldn't. I would have said fucking trade the guy. That's what I would have said. Because he's not a $9.75 million player, but he's also not a guy that you should be handing out a 6-year no movement clause to. He's not a generational talent. He's a very good player. But if you're trying to rebuild, you need to have flexibility. They have taken away their own flexibility. Now, sure, it's entirely possible that Konecny, 2 years from now, if things aren't going the way they're supposed to, maybe he'll just want to be out. And maybe a team like a Boston will be looking to add a player because they're looking to try to make themselves a contender again. And Konecny says, fine, I'll go to Boston. And it doesn't matter. No movement clause doesn't mean that he is unmovable. He just has to approve it. However, there is a possibility here that this rebuild doesn't go according to plan, and 2 years from now you want to trade him, and he pulls a Claude Giroux and says, I will only go to Colorado, or I will only go to New York. Then what do you do? Then do you come back and say, well,
At least we saved the $750,000 a year. At least we saved that money on the cap because we gave him a 6-year no movement clause.
That's insane. It's bad business. And no one can convince me otherwise. I'm actually a little bit sad that we're not in the midst of hockey season, because I would have absolutely loved to have had a little chat with Keith Jones and Danny Briere, because pretty much every home game, they come up the elevator, they walk by, sometimes we chitty-chat a little bit. If I say something that's a little bit outlandish, it might not be them who says it, but somebody will get word back to me that they thought something was outlandish. I've never had to retract, though, so that's always nice. It's the beauty of that contract. The beauty of that partnership, of maintaining our ability to be critical and have creative control. It's a beautiful thing. Thanks, Hulk Hogan. Creative control doesn't work for me, brother. It's bad business. The only way that a 6-year no movement clause makes sense is because you really do think that Travis Konecny is going to be a vital part of your rebuild and about turning this team into a cup contender. He's 27 right now. By year 4, he will be 31. That is when most people, I think, expect whatever this version of the Flyers are to become maybe a team that is in the playoffs consistently and is a number one defenseman away from being a cup contender. 31 isn't old. 31 is not your prime. And at his size and with his playing style, it is more likely than not that this isn't going to work. And I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but I could be wrong. The thing that obviously changes everything is if Michkov this year becomes a 30-goal scorer as a rookie, right? Or if Michkov becomes a guy who really does change the entire view of what this team is, and all of a sudden free agents decide that they want to play here because they can see what the Flyers are building, then fine. But if that happens, if Michkov becomes that guy and this becomes another bubble playoff team, they're not getting the top-end talent. Then once again, it falls all on Michkov to be the generational talent, and they haven't done enough to surround him with elite talent yet. It's maybe the one drawback to Michkov coming over this year, to him coming over early, is that he does add actual talent by him being in the lineup. He does actively make your team better. If you want to do a one-for-one swap, he is exponentially better and more impactful than Cam Atkinson was last year. So while you didn't add a lot of talent, and while you didn't replace Sean Walker, it's iffy. I just don't see it. I don't see where this contract made sense. The no movement clause, if it hadn't been in there, I'd have said good bit of business by the Philadelphia Flyers. Decent enough.